It is natural for all mankind to seek for happiness. That was the opening line of a letter a woman in Millbury wrote in 1840. That letter was recently found by a gentleman in town, and that letter began the journey of what is now a novel based on our beloved town from 1840. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 13 of the Naff Report. I'm so excited for you all to be joining us tonight because tonight we'll be discussing that very book. And it is written by our guest this evening. His name is Art Martin. Mr. Martin, welcome to the Naff Report.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to talk to you this evening because, first of all, I'm as big a fan of Millbury as you can find, and I also love the history of our town. So this novel is something I've really enjoyed reading thus far. So I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of pick your brain of how you got to writing this book, what sort of interesting things you learned about the town in your research. But before we get into that, just to give the folks at home a bit of your background, as I understand it, you grew up in the Springfield area, you had this long successful career in business, and you found yourself calling Millbury home, and you were renovating a house in town.
Yeah.
And in that house, you found this leather-bound case or what have you, and in that case was this letter.
Right. What I found was this case was actually handed down from owner to owner since
Wow.
1822, when the house was first erected.
Wow.
So the original plan was in the box and all of that. But there was this letter tucked away on the bottom, and the letter was entitled Happiness. When I first looked at the letter, I said, oh, happiness, this would be really interesting to read. And I set off to read it. And penmanship back in the 1840s is a little difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
You know? But I read through the letter, and I was just intrigued. I was intrigued by the letter, and the more I read it, the more I digested it, the more intrigued I became.
And did you have any conversations with prior owners of the house about the leather case, the letter, or was it just sort of this, hey, here's this cool thing that's been passed down?
Right. It was just actually it was just this cool thing that was passed down.
Cool.
There was a couple that moved into the house shortly for a couple of years before I did, but before that, the house had only had one other owner besides the Bixbys. So the house doesn't have a lot of history of owners. So basically, when I received the box, I made a commitment to pass it on, but boy, I really enjoyed it, treasured it, and everything was in it.
Yeah, I by evidence of your journey and the book you wrote, it certainly
Right.
is something to treasure.
Right.
Because you don't stumble across artifacts like that every day.
Yeah.
And that's something that sort of intrigued me right away when I first heard of your story, because as I mentioned, I love this town, and I just love our unique history. So the fact that you were able to sort of uncover that made me really excited to learn more about your process in writing the book, and also just really excited to read the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're a business guy.
Right.
And you had a successful career as a CEO. You still advise entrepreneurs and small businesses today. And you wrote a novel based in 1840.
Right.
That isn't something that always sort of goes hand in hand. Did you always think you were going to be an author?
Well, I'm a maverick, basically what I am. I
like
sort
that.
of defy gravity.
Yeah.
I do things. I mean, I started a business when, without the business background. I got my business background after I started the business. I became an engineer here in a startup in Hopkinton back in 1981, and I wasn't an engineer. I learned, I learn as I go.
Yeah.
I take chances, and I think there's a lot of people that like to write a novel. I was recently at a convention in Nashville, and there was a guest speaker that got up and was talking about his new book he just released called Finish. And he had quoted that 85% of the people that start novels never finish them. And
I believe that
after
for
this
sure.
journey, I can understand why. Right.
Now, you grew your business in Hopkinton. You were, if I have this correct, you're from the Springfield area. How did Millbury and Sutton become your new home?
Well, Millbury was my 8th home. So
Okay.
I started off in Springfield. I met my wife. She lived in West Springfield. We moved out to Westfield and lived there for, I think, 5 or 6 years, actually. And then I got a job out in Hopkinton. We moved out into Hopkinton. I bought a house in Milford, ended up buying an old house in Sherborne, and actually started my restoration there.
Yep.
And then ended up in Holliston in a big, big home. I have 4 children. We had a big home in the center of Holliston, Mass. My business had moved to Holliston, so I was working out of Holliston, so it was just where the kids grew up.
Yep. Great town, Holliston.
It was a great town.
Yeah.
It is a great town.
Yeah.
We had a great house in a great town. And actually, I might write a book about that one day. Lavinia was the so-called ghost in the home that I owned. The house had built in 1727, so it had history. And actually, in a couple of the New England books about ghosts. But anyway, when it came time for me to retire at the ripe age of 53, that's what all entrepreneurs do. They
good for
want
you.
to retire at 53. Yeah. I wanted to downsize from my big house to something small and manageable, and the Millbury house came along, and it was something we both thought was really nice.
Now, seeing that you had restored a couple houses before you came to town, were you looking for another restoration project? Had this become sort of like a labor of love?
Yeah, this one we were looking for. We really wanted to restore the house, and it was funny because when we walked into the Millbury house, it was like walking into the 1950s. So it was a disguised house. But many times you walk into an old house like that, and it had been totally gutted, so there would be nothing there.
Right.
With the Millbury house, everything was there. The hardware was there. The doors were there. They were all under a lot of paint and all of that. But even the original windows were there from 1822. So it was really a delight to bring that house back to its original condition.
Yeah. And you've done something similar in Sutton.
Yeah. So after 5 years in Millbury, we got the itch. We had the downturn in 2008, I believe, or 7. Houses were selling for next to nothing, and we saw this house on Central Turnpike in Sutton that was just the perfect setting for what we wanted, to live in, and we chose to buy that house. So we bought that house. We had both houses, and we started restoration on the Sutton house. So both houses are in the book.
Oh, cool.
We connect the houses together.
Okay.
And the towns together.
Now, as I understand, you sort of had to, the story here is you went from a letter to an entire novel. So talk about the research you did to complete the story you wanted to complete, and how you were able to piece by piece connect all these facts about Millbury and Sutton and create this story.
It starts with the fact that I've always enjoyed early American history. So you have to enjoy something.
Yeah, oh, sure.
And I got a master's degree in religious studies back in the mid-90s. So I'm a thinker. I enjoy spirituality. I enjoy life and emotions. And so basically what I did was, with all of that background in history and with the interest in writing through the years, I looked at the letter and I just said, I really need to put this together. I started off actually in the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, which is a really great place to go and just go through archives.
Where are they located?
They're right on, I'm thinking.
Is it downtown area?
It's in the downtown area.
Cool.
It's right near Clark University where I work.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember the name of the street. I should know.
But that area. Neat.
But in that area, down by WPI actually.
Cool.
Okay. But I forgot to mention that I've been an interpreter at Old Sturbridge Village for 12 years as well. So I teach dance at Old Sturbridge Village. My
A
wife is a
maverick and a
dancer.
Renaissance man.
Yeah, see, a maverick and a Renaissance. So I do whatever. So I've been through a lot of history training, to become an interpreter. I feel kind of at home sometimes, when I'm at the village.
Sure.
In costume teaching, dance, and
That's your milieu.
this is what we do,
Yeah.
right? So taking all of that, I started doing some very specific looking at Millbury, and Sutton, and the history of Millbury and Sutton. And there's, I think there's a great history book, the historical that was written for the tricentennial, bicentennial.
Yeah, Mr. Sinacola's book.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
I read that.
Yeah.
There's a couple of books. There are a couple of history books that are available in the archives for both Sutton and Millbury. There's the records of birth, marriages, and all of that go back, into the years.
Quite a ways, yeah.
There's cemeteries. I think the thing that helped me the most was a map that I found. I think it was at the Antiquarian Society. That was a map of Millbury in 1851. So there may be some missing, but what I did was I used that map as my map, unless I found it truly wasn't in that way.
Sure.
But yeah, so using the map, using names, searching the names, going through all of the history books that I could find on the area, I was able to put together, I think, a pretty factual story about Millbury, although very fictional as far as the romance between Lucinda and Obadiah. So.
And from the time you found the letter to writing the book, how long was that process?
It's probably 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah, but it was 3 years before I actually decided I have to write a book about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so it was 3 years of research, and writing.
Okay. And what would you say took the longest, the research or the writing?
The research.
I
think
believe
the research.
that.
I did. I looked at all of the newspapers that were published in that time period. I found, I got the weather for the day, so because I just enjoyed. When I got up in the morning, I was going to write a chapter about a particular day. I needed to know the weather. I needed to know what was going on.
How do you go about finding that?
It's actually in a newspaper that Worcester had called the National Aegis, and it's at the American Antiquarian Society.
Wow.
And they put it all on microfiche so you can look. And I got a lot of the when Lucinda goes to Worcester to buy some material for a gown she's going to make. It's actually the store was actually advertising that material in the paper for 1840. So a lot of that stuff going on.
I got two impressions when I started reading the book. One is the details are intricate, and you can almost you can understand how much research you did just by reading it.
Yeah. So when I set off to write the book, being a first-time author, my interest was in getting the historical facts as true as I could. That is, places, people, and things. Although the story, I said, is fictional, it was very important to me to get that right. And so, going through that book, I put as much of the facts in place as I could. Yeah.
And the main character is Lucinda.
Lucinda, yes.
And you write about her family and what her life was like.
Right.
And then, but you also, in some of the characters, of course, it's a fiction book, so it's a novel, so some of the characters are fictional, but you also have some real-life characters. Yeah,
so Asa Waters and Susan are in the book, along with their daughter, Adelia. Adelia was 20 years old, so, 20 and 25. But Lucinda was 25.
Yep.
There were some people living up the street in Chamberlain, named the Chamberlains, in a tavern, and where the tavern used to be up in Millbury, near the schoolhouse. Lois, so Lois was 25 years old at the time. Lois Chamberlain. She was a friend of Lucinda. Lucinda taught penmanship up at the schoolhouse.
And this is up on Old Common?
On Old Common.
Which is really neat, because friends of mine live in that house now.
Right, you had mentioned that, yeah.
It's just, the second impression I got from the book is, it's so easy as you're reading it to picture exactly where the characters are. in
Yeah,
in modern day Millbury. It's just really a really neat novel to read like that.
So back to the sort of the construction of the book was my objective was to make the book simple to read, easy to read. I didn't want, I wasn't into this for complexity and hidden this and that. Although there is a lot of emotions, a lot of hidden things in there.
Sure.
Still, that people, I've had some very good conversation with people who have read it, who have asked me some very interesting questions, which I never realized I wrote what I wrote in there. I said, well, yeah, I guess that's true. But I tried to make the book very readable.
And it is, from my perspective, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
The pages turn themselves.
So the Lowland Tavern, which is down on Riverland Street, right? It's still there. It's an apartment building right on the corner of Riverland. But up the street was Dennis and his wife Salome Fisher. And they had a daughter, Harriet, and a son, Charles. They're in the book. That particular inn, that Lower Tavern, was owned by a fellow from Sutton at the time, Jonas Sibley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was a famous, well, famous, but he was an important attorney.
Oh, cool.
And so there's some fictional of, I know he owned it because it's on the map that he owned it. I know where he lived in Sutton, and I couldn't, but so I have Dennis and his wife Salome as innkeepers because he had a shop up the street that,
Very neat.
By the wheelwright shop.
And that tavern is across where Goretti's is now,
right?
Yeah.
Diagonal from Goretti's, right?
Yeah, okay. I know that building for sure.
Yeah, and I know that building now because I've been in it, around it, and yeah.
Too neat.
So.
Talk about sort of, in your research, you think you know the history of Millbury, and then as you dive in, there's way more history about Millbury than anyone in town actually knows, right? But of all the people I've met in town, you probably have the most unique perspective on that history. Would you say there was something that sort of jumped out to you in your research that you found pretty surprising?
There was a lot of things that were surprising.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, the Blackstone Canal, where was it at the time? What was going on with the Blackstone Canal? I did a lot of research on the Blackstone Canal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most intriguing thing, the thing that I think really helped me the most was Asa Waters loved Christmas. And I've been doing this historical stuff for a long time.
Yep.
And Congregationalists in the early 1800s just didn't do Christmas for the most part.
Okay.
The old Sturbridge Village, Christmas wasn't a part of their
interpretation
until they got commercial with this candlelight by Christmas thing.
Okay.
But reality would say, Christmas was far and few between. So when I went to Asa Waters' mansion, to the Historical Society, and did some research, did some talking and stuff, and found out that Asa Waters had a Christmas ball, Christmas dance, Christmas gathering every Christmas Eve, that was intriguing to me.
Yeah.
And that made, that was very prominent in the book.
Yeah.
The whole book revolved around this ball that was going to be Christmas Eve. And it's surprising, Asa Waters actually died in 1841, the year following, on Christmas Eve.
Oh, okay.
So that's,
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been, that to me was pretty interesting history.
We had the director of the Asa Waters Mansion on the program, and one of the things, we might have had this conversation off camera, but one of the things he brought up is Asa Waters was sort of like the Jay Gatsby of his time. He built that house and he loved to entertain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, of the day, sort of, as I understand it, the biggest thing almost of the year, this Christmas party.
Yep.
This Christmas party.
Mm-hmm.
So I just love the fact that you still have that building today, and it was an integral part of society back in 1840. So it's really nice to see how you sort of intertwine that into the story and the character development.
Yeah, it was that made the book work for me.
Yeah.
I needed a place to have a Christmas ball. That's what I needed to have that.
Yeah.
And when that came along, I said, "Oh, geez, now I can even stay true to the true to true to the
Yeah.
whole thing, and historically, make this into the ball that Lucinda and Obadiah was invited to.
Yeah,
So.
very cool. And of course, we have the Chain of Lights every year in Millbury, and that's an event where there's a lot going on in town, but sort of one of the staples is there are events going on at the mansion, and I forget what weekend it is. Usually it's sort of the beginning of December, and it's not, of course, officially a Christmas event in town, but the theme is holiday, and the theme, of course, is, without saying it, it's a Christmas type of day in town.
Right.
And one of the staples is as I mentioned, what happens at the mansion. So I think it's pretty cool for our community that sort of, the tradition has changed. It's not a ball put on by the Waters family anymore, but that facility is still a huge part of our society during that very special time of year.
Yeah, and it's really great that it was brought back.
Yeah,
and
I love that facility.
it is a nice place.
Now, the town Millbury itself. Today we sort of all understand it as this nice small hometown where it's a pretty welcoming community. Everyone sort of has an understanding of who everybody is. You go to Goretti's, you're probably going to run into somebody you see at the at that grocery store. And I sort of myself think, is it wrong to think of Millbury as like Bedford Falls in the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Should we always want to be that way, or should we sort of become change the face of town, change our identity? But the roots of who we are today come from where we were in 1813 when we were founded, in 1840. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, what, from all your research and the great lengths you went to find these intricate details to help with your plot and your character development. Do you think there's one or two things that sticks out that you could sort of identify how we're a lot alike as we were in 1840 and what might have changed since then?
Yeah, I could focus a bit on the change. I think the biggest difference is industry. The book takes place in, throughout all of Millbury, from the Old Common down through Brahmanville up into, Armory Village.
Yep.
If I was, as I was coming up, actually I was driving in from Sutton and I was coming along Singletary, and I was thinking, he's going to, probably ask me some question about that. So I'm looking, and, the mill buildings that are in Brahmanville, they're not working. They're not running. In 1840, that would be a hustle and a bustle.
Yeah.
There was a lot of industry moving in. In 1836, they moved the Congregational Church from Old Common down to the mill workers, because that's where they were. They took that whole church down Old Common Road, and down there, and they moved it down and erected it so that the people from the mills had a place to worship and didn't have to go all the way up to Old Common.
Which is which is really funny, because if I remember right, Beach Street, the street that goes up to Old Common, that wasn't there, right?
Right.
Old Common Road was sort of this
Old Common Road was the way to go.
Yeah.
So, of course, in Lucinda in the book, she complains that they moved the church. Now she has to go all the way down there, but that's another thing. But then as you go, you go past the mills, you come up to the Goen Bridge, which is the bridge that goes over the Blackstone. That was a flat bridge, because it just arched the Blackstone Canal.
Interesting.
I think of the Blackstone Canal. It was operational. It was on its way out. It wasn't on its way out because of need. It was on its way out because it just didn't work well. It didn't work in the droughts. It didn't work in the winter. It just didn't have what it was hoped to be.
Yeah.
But the railroad was shortly behind it in 1848. They would be building the railroad.
Okay.
So, but then you go over the bridge, and there's Asa Waters' mansion. You're right. So someone lived in that mansion and prospered from the factories that built arms throughout Millbury. I mean, Asa Waters what, you know, there was industry, there was patents being claimed,
I-
all kinds of things.
I was there recently, and from his office, he could look out and observe his factories.
Yeah, there was 3 or 4 of them around.
I don't think
Yeah.
there's a business set up that way in
Right.
Millbury today.
Yeah. So I think it was industry.
Yeah.
I think it was industry. I mean, the mills over by Goretti's, all that
Yep.
pond in the back, right next to the Lowland Tavern, was all mills, and
Cordis
all
Mills,
workers.
yeah.
So I think that would be my my thought.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. One of the things politically we've talked a lot about in town is the need for a resurgence in economic development and growing our commercial base. We have a lot of great people in town, but the less businesses you have in town, the more the town has to rely on our residents to pay for the things we
Right.
like. So that commercial, that industrial part of our community was so important back then. And that's why we have all these mills we see today. And some have been restored and are beautiful. Down on Water Street, a couple of the mills down there have been beautifully redone. Right. The Cordis mills across from CVS have been beautifully redone. But I think that's a really interesting point. Now, there are some, I know I want to get the name right, I believe it's S&D Spinning, the mill.
Yeah,
that's
S&D Spin, they're still spinning.
Yeah, and they make Major League Baseballs.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
love it. And I need it. I should have said that because they've been making the thread basically for Major League Baseball forever.
Yeah, and that's that is sort of a undersold story of who we are as a community.
Really, it is.
And I would love to see more of that. The ability to have a great community. I think we get living here, right? Mm-hmm. It's great to live here. I do think where we currently fall a little short is it's a great place to live. There aren't too many places to work in town.
Not in town, right?
And that, I know you mentioned Brahmanville. That's sort of where I grew up. I grew up the street probably isn't technically Brahmanville, but it's essentially in that neighborhood, and that's home to me. I used to, as a kid, walk down to the Village Knoll and buy penny candy, and that area of town. Why I romanticize it a little bit is that was a big part of the Industrial Revolution.
It was,
which increased the standard of living not just for people in Millbury, but essentially an entire nation. Mm-hmm. And Millbury had a big part in that. So, where I think, our focus should be is getting back to a point like that. Of course, the balance I think is you don't want to be Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life, but you don't want to be, Manhattan.
Right.
The balance is somewhere in between,
there, right. Yeah.
But back then, the community seemed to thrive a bit because it was industrially strong. So I think that's an excellent point. Now, if folks want to pick up a copy, I know they can do so at Amazon. All they would have to do is search the title, but it's also available at a local bookstore.
It is. Enchanted Passage in Sutton on Armsby Road. I stopped by this afternoon, and I met with Kim, who was just very welcoming. Took some copies, put them on the shelf for us, so it's available locally, and I'll keep stocking her shelves as she needs them. And then again, it's available on Kindle and on iBooks as well.
Wonderful. So, well, I'm really enjoying reading it thus far. Mr. Martin, I would like to thank you for coming on the program. Folks at home, I highly recommend you picking yourself up a copy of The Summer of 1840. It's a wonderful read. And that will do it for us this week. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great week. Good night, Millbury. Goes fast, huh?
It goes fast.